Hello, Haunted Heart Society viewers, and welcome, as always, to the site of all of my shenanigans, the spare bedroom floor. This is my new friend, a spinning wheel, whom I have not yet named. So, stay tuned for a series on the other Emily badly teaches herself how to spin. So, yeah, stay tuned for that. But the subject of today's video is divination and fortune telling, the history thereof, and a brief overview of one particular type, because it turns out in order to do the history of divination and fortune telling, you actually have to focus on each individual type because the history is very specific to whichever type of divination or fortune telling that you are talking about. That's what I discovered as I was doing the research rabbit hole for this video. So today we're going to be focusing a lot more on tarot or tarot cards because that is a skill that I have been practicing for many years, and it is a subject that I already knew a good bit about, but I did learn a lot in the, preparation for this video. And in the future, this may very well be a series. So I'm going to list off a bunch of different types of divination and fortune telling in this video. So if there's any ones that you in particular are curious about and would like to hear me do next, feel free to just leave them in the comments below of which one that you want to hear next. Or if there's one that I don't mention that you are really particularly interested in or curious about, please feel free to suggest it. So to start, I found out some really interesting things, specifically that divination and fortune telling are technically two separate subjects, although the overlap is extreme. Divination is more of a ritual practice that is used in a religious context, and then fortune telling was more for personal purposes. But the types of things that people do for divination and fortune telling are often very, very similar, and there's a lot of overlap of practices. So the things that people do to divine and to fortune tell are almost the same types of things, but their purposes are what are different, which I found very interesting. So that's something we learned today. There are a ton of different types. There are types having to do with reading items. There are types having to do with reading bodies, people. And then there are types having to do with reading forces. So those are like the three main categories that I really noticed for the most part. So reading things could include bones, runes, dice, things that you would scatter and toss. There are also cards. You might scatter and toss salt. You might read tea leaves. That's a very classic one that I have practiced a little bit of as well. So if I don't really get any kind of information or commentary about where to go next, tea reading might be my next step, because again, that's another one that I have practiced in the past. You also might read crystal balls, and in China there is an ancient practice called the I Ching, which is a matter of counting out sticks and laying them out into certain patterns to divine the answers to questions. Then we move into the second category, which is where you have reading people, reading parts of people. So you have palmistry, reading the lines in hands, which I've had done to me, but I've never tried it before. We also have phrenology, which is reading like the contours of your skull, which was really popular in, I believe, the 19th century or into the 20th century, Victorian era. There was a whole time period, I also may be mixing myself up here, but there was a whole time period when phrenology was really big and they thought that they could divine intelligence. It was used in racism a lot. Very interesting concept there. So that'll be another really good big deep dive. And then I learned about this one, physiognomy, today. I also may be pronouncing that incorrectly, was the reading of faces. So they would read different facial features to try to divine your future. Then there was also graphology, which was reading of handwriting, which we still use in criminal cases today, although I don't know how accurate or how common this practice is, but there is the concept of graphology, so reading people's handwriting in order to determine either their future or traits about them. So I have seen this used in, crime dramas and serials in order to determine, oh, the serial killer must be like this because he writes his G's this way. But you can also determine, did someone write this note, because you could compare handwriting. So a lot of this has all, come together. And then you have the reading of forces. So that's things like astrology and numerology. And overall, it all kind of comes together in the concept of divination being any ritual practice that is used to organize seemingly random signs and symbols to gain insight into a matter or a question at hand. So basically, these are all different ways that humans in the past have tried to organize or understand things that may seem random, patterns that we may not understand, in order to figure out what's going on in our lives. Just like how humans have always gone ahead and made up stories to explain things that we didn't understand, we have made up ways to ritually divine answers to questions and problems that in our lives we don't currently understand. So, we've been doing it for literally thousands of years. One of the things I found out is that some of the earliest divination practices and fortune-telling practices have gone back to 4000 BCE. We have evidence of forms of fortune-telling being practiced as early as that 4000 BCE in ancient China, Egypt, I'm not sure where Chaldea is, or Chaldea, and Babylonia. And actually, there's mentions of fortune-telling and casting lots being mentioned in the Bible. There's also mentions of divination being like not okay in certain sections of the Bible in the Old Testament. So there's a lot of, it goes back pretty far. So that's pretty fascinating to me, and we have been talking about this forever. Greece and Rome also had a lot of instances of divination and fortune-telling, specifically oracles and seers were really important. This was actually really cool. I learned a little bit about this. You would consult an oracle, but the oracles were always really busy and had a high demand for their work, so oftentimes people would be able to consult seers more often, but seers could only answer yes or no questions. So the oracles were the conduits of the gods on earth. They were directly linked to the gods, and you would go to them in order to obtain information. But when you couldn't get to an oracle, you would try to go to a seer. Again, they could only answer limited yes or no questions, and they interpreted signs from the gods. They were not directly linked to the gods the way that the oracles were thought to be, but they would interpret all the different signs that could be read from the gods. So they used different things like orthmancy, which is where you would interpret the flight patterns of birds, the calls of different birds, and try to figure out what the answer was based on that information. Now, I do not actually know how to pronounce this. Extispicy, I keep wanting to read it as extra spicy, is the process of ritually slaughtering an animal and then reading the signs from their entrails. So that they're all kind of basing things on natural signs in order to obtain the answer, yes or no, to your question. So yeah, extra spicy animals. But that was also very common at times. Sacrificing of animals goes back, again, thousands of years. That's very rooted as well in other Abrahamic religions. So I found that all these connections really very, very interesting. Like I said, this is going to just probably be the first of many conversations we have on this channel about fortune telling and divination, but that is a brief overview of the history of just what I gleaned today about just some basics of fortune telling and divination. Now, how we get from where we're at with, we've started fortune telling in 4000 BCE, like before Common Era, all the way up to what we kind of know today, again, depends on the form of fortune telling and just the sort of stereotypes that have developed around it. So for example, I'm going to talk a little bit about tarot, and, again, we're steeped in things like racism, we're steeped in things like stereotypes and fear, and a lot of that has to do with things getting, attached to the occult, and then the occult getting a bad reputation here, there, and everywhere. So we're going to go ahead and turn the page on our little notebook here, and let me produce my tarot decks. Let's start with that. Okay, so I have two that I have been actively using lately, and but I have also used multitudes of, different types in the past. I started reading in about 8th grade. My best friend taught me how to read tarot with the classic Rider-Waite tarot. And funny story about that, they obviously, it's a classic tarot deck. It's got naked people on, so we drew little black censor bars over everybody so we could bring them to school and not get in trouble. So my first tarot deck was the classic Rider-Waite with little black censor bars drawn over everybody's, chests and groin. We were, 14, 13? We were kids. So the two tarot decks that I have been really exclusively using the last couple of years are the Ethereal Visions Illuminated Tarot deck. Oh yes, I'm a makeup influencer now. Which was created by Matt Hughes. It is really a very gorgeous deck and has a lot of art deco. And the other one I really like, this one I've been really working a lot with, one of those weirdos who keeps my tarot decks, wrapped. There we go. With crystals, which is another part of divination, being able to use and read crystals, is the Wild Unknown Tarot, which has been created by Kim Kranz. Again, oh look, I'm a makeup influencer. I love this one because it's got more of like a spooky dark vibe to it, and it's all kind of based on animal spirits. And I'm like really in tune with this one. I like this one a lot. Normally when you get a tarot deck, it will always come with an instruction booklet about this tarot deck. So the explanation as to how you read these cards. And you've got oftentimes like a different, the backs are decorated and each card has beautiful artwork on it. So they have 4 different suits, which I'll talk more about in a little bit. Usually it is swords, wands. Oh, sorry, the gold is reflecting really strongly. Then you usually have cups. And let me go find you some pentacles. And pentacles. There we go. Or coins. They all have different names, but 4 different suits. And then as you can see, this one has a very different style. This one's got the snake skin on the back, and this one is almost exclusively decorated in black and white. And then the major arcana and the suited cards all have rainbow colors. So here is the swords of this deck. The pentacles. The cups. And the wands. Now, on to a slight brief history of tarot, and then I thought we might do a little bit of a reading so you can get some information about how this works. So, tarot decks were invented in 1430s in Italy, and they originally just took the 4 suited pack of cards that we are used to today with clubs, hearts, diamonds, and spades, and added an entire 5th suit in order to invent a new game. So they called them the Trionfi, or the Triumphs, and they added an extra card that had no suit and no number called the Fool, also known as Il Matto. So we now call the Trionfi the major arcana, but back then they were just the Triumphs or the Trumps, and they basically used them in a card game. They were not used for divination until much, much later, which I find very interesting, and in an entirely different country. So the Italians took what we know, just a regular pack of cards, a deck of cards, and added an entirely 5th suit of 22 new cards and slapped all these amazing names on them. I'll explain more about that in a minute. And just decided we're going to make up card games. And that's what this whole thing was invented for. They are allegorical, and they depicted originally likely characters from medieval reenactments of Roman triumphal processions. So even then, we had like 4 layers of like allegory going on here. So they were thinking back, we're going to represent medieval characters, like medieval representations of Roman representations from triumphal parades. So basically, if we're thinking like a carnival, like float in a carnival parade today, that's essentially what they were going for. And they were originally unnumbered, so you actually had to memorize in what order they went so you know what the point scores were and how they outranked each other. Nowadays, they all have a number on them. So for example, here is Justice, and we can see that it is 11. But back in the day, you had to memorize that this was 11, so it outranked everything before it. Today's tarot is based on the Venetian or the Piedmontese tarot. So they had like multiple ones across Italy, but the one that we use today is based on the Venetian version. And there are 78 cards in the deck, 22 major arcana, which is again the ones that are based on the Trionfi, the Roman triumph parade, and the 56 minor arcana, which are the standard hearts, spades. I wrote it down. The hearts, spades, diamonds, and clubs. So those were all the originals. Plus you have the one extra, the Fool, which essentially is like 0. It's just added on top. The major arcana represent various different forces, characters, virtues, and vices. So I'll display them all in a little bit, but they go by different names and they all represent different things. And the suits actually line up to different ones. So you've got the wands / batons / rods. So they might go by different names depending on what deck you're working with. And those represent the clubs. The cups were equivalent to the hearts, the swords to the spades, and then whether it's coins, pentacles, or discs, again, depending on the deck that you're working with, those are the diamonds. So they all kind of like match themselves up there. And it wasn't until 1780 in France that we started using them as a divination or a fortune telling tool, and that's when that occult connection started to come in. Prior to that, again, they were just for card games, and the triomphe were the trump cards, the higher value cards that you wanted to get. Specific games were developed all over Europe, but what's really interesting is that they were all very, very similar, even though they were developed in different places: France, Switzerland, Italy, Germany. And I just had some information about the rules. Like, they're for 3 to 5 players. And then triomphe, which was again the name of a lot of the games that they played, are the ancestors to whist and bridge. So the games that we play now, whist and bridge, are actually grown from the tarot games, the triomphe. So I found that very interesting. Once France in 1780 kind of said, hey, I think we could do something with this, they started to develop the idea that each of the major arcana would represent certain things, and then each of the minor arcana, each suit would represent certain things. It all also becomes influenced by where it is. Hi, kitten. Where it is in position to other cards, where it is in relation to being right side up or upside down, and how it's laid out in the spread. Also, what type of question you're asking and what type of spread you're doing. It developed from there. I figured let's get over to the practical portion. All right, so these are not in a particular order. I just separated them out into their respective suits, and I thought I'd show you the major arcana in this deck specifically. And this deck has a few that are different than one expects, especially because the triomphe over time, the triumphs or the major arcana, are not the same as the originals. So there were like the Papus or the female pope and some other ones that have just generally changed over time. And these are the ones that are in this deck specifically, and other decks are just generally different. But I really, like I said, I like this deck a lot, but also that other deck makers use different ones, and over time, I believe they just have changed. So you've got the World, which is a classic one that I've seen in almost every deck I've ever worked with. The Hermit, another one that I've seen in almost every deck. You have the Lovers, which again are very standard, usually there. The Chariot, this one I think can be called other things, but usually there is one that's of this nature. The High Priestess, which sometimes has a different name. This one might have originally been the Papus. The Fool, like we said before, is the 0 card, or it's usually the unnumbered major arcana. And I just think the duckling is adorable. You have Justice, which again, similar concept, maybe go by different names, but usually involved. The Sun and the Moon and the Star are almost always there. Judgment. The Magician, again, this one is usually involved, but also may go by different names. The Emperor and the Empress are usually there somewhere. Death and the Tower are usually involved. Temperance. The Star, as mentioned previously. Strength. So now this one I think is odd to this deck, but usually, again, different names in other decks. The Empress, there we go. The Moon. The Wheel of Fortune. Now this one's a big one because this concept of the year turning around, the wheel turning around, everything being cyclical comes around a lot. The Hierophant. The Hanged Man, also a very standard common card. The Tower. Now, it's really interesting because a lot of people think that death just, means death. Doesn't. Death means change. The Tower means death. And the Devil. Like I said, I just love the style on this deck. So what we are going to go ahead and do at this point, I'm not going to give you a tour of all the others because you'll probably just see some of them in the reading, but I'm going to go ahead and show you just some basic spreads, some basic things that you can do with tarot, and I'll just do a quick little reading. All right, so the first thing that you're going to have to do is very thoroughly shuffle your cards. And what I usually do is I shuffle the cards myself a number of times, and then I give them to the querent, or the person who is asking for the reading, and have them, shuffle the cards around in their hands a few times while they think of the question or the query that they are asking. So, querent, query. That is why they're called that. But I also just have them think of it for a little while so that they can ruminate on it. And essentially, you're asking the cards to answer. So by giving them a chance to ask the cards, and this might just be my own personal practice, it might just be, you know, woo-woo nonsense, but it gives them a chance to imbue the cards with their energy, and so that it will give them a more accurate reading. Like I said, might just be woo-woo. But that's what fortune telling is. It's personal in an attempt to divine an answer about a question or a problem that you're currently having. So, like I said, we go with it. I try. All right, so I give them a really, really good shuffle, especially because I pulled them all out into their respective sections, so they really have to get worked back together. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't believe this deck reads reversed at all, so it does not necessarily matter if they are right side up or upside down. Yeah, so this one, like this deck does not read reversed at all, and I tend to not if I don't really have to. It's usually when you read a card right side up, it's like a positive meaning, and reversed is a negative meaning or the opposite of the meaning on the card. But again, it's a lot of personal preference. It's very much how you interpret. It's like stories laid out on paper. Okay, so there are a multitude of different ways that you can lay out tarot cards, and it depends on how much energy that you have and how you're really like working with people. So you can do a single card reading where you just kind of say, you know, what's my day looking like? What do I have to look forward to? Things like that. Just a simple, like, what's my outlook for this day? You can also do a past, present, future, or any kind of 3-card reading, which essentially asks, what is the problem? What is holding me back from overcoming this problem? And what do I need to do to overcome this problem? Or what is the past of this situation? What is the current present of the situation? And what is the future of this situation? Again, there's many different ways to read this, but a 3-card is a 3-part, asking yourself basically part 1, part 2, part 3. Part 3 is almost always, what is the outcome or how can I achieve this outcome? Beginning is usually like, where am I stuck? And, you know, what is the current sort of middle ground here? So lots of different ways to do this. Again, you can just, if you Google, you know, different types of tarot spreads, you can find 50 million ways to do it. Or if you just Google 3-card tarot spread, you'll find a bunch of different styles and ways. It all depends on personal preference and like your vibe, your feeling, or what the situation calls for. And when I have a querent would like a reading from me, I give them a couple different options and let them pick the one that best suits their situation. And sometimes I don't even have them tell me the question. I usually just say, you can either tell me the question and let me know ahead of time. You can tell it to me after the reading, or you can give me like a little overview of what it is that you're trying to figure out, and I will like work to the best of my ability. So sometimes I go in completely blind and I read it, and then they kind of give me like the, how did you figure this out? So I just read the stories. There is the clarity spread where you have that's what again this one gives you, but it's a 4-card reading. What is the situation? What are the clarifying factors? How is this leading into it? And then they give me a couple more. There's also the classic Celtic cross, which is a 10-card and the most intensive, like the most explorative one, where you actually have the querent pull a card that is based on their personality. You lay that down on the bottom and then have the heart of the matter, opposing factors, root cause, past, goal, future, and then the like person involved, external influences, the hopes and fears, and the final outcome, and you have to tie it all together at the end. So it is a classic favorite. Most of the time, like when you get your cards read by just a standard person, this is what you're going to go for. And there's also a like 13-card spread here that's like a year, like what's your year ahead going to be. So there's a lot here, and it's just really, there's many different ways to read tarot. I tend to do a lot of 3-card readings for people, because generally if I have like a big group of friends that I'm doing for, it's a lot easier to do a bunch of 3-card readings. And the Celtic cross is just, it's a lot to put together in one go. So I'm skipping around here a little bit, but once you have your deck nicely shuffled, you give the querent the deck, have them shuffle it while they think of the question, and then I have them cut it into 3 piles. So I have the querent cut it into 3 piles, just have whatever 3 they feel comfortable with. And then I have them pick the pile that they feel the most attuned to. A lot of people tend to go for the middle. It's very interesting. But I'm liking this pile today. And then I put them back together. All right, so once you have your deck laid out, cut, and ready to go, I go ahead and I lay the cards out. I actually have not thought of a question, so I'm just going to ask, what's my week ahead look like? And I think I just have my deck upside down, so 1, 2, 3. All right, so now I fetch out the book. All right, so to start, I ask, what does my week look like? The Emperor is the card, so protective, decisive, and stable, clarity of mind, actions, or decisions. Sometimes it's literal, and other times reconnects to the part of you that knows to stand strong and tall. So what I'm essentially getting here is the idea that I need to stand tall and strong, be clear in my actions and decisions, and just know that, like, I know what to do. I need to just say, all right, I've got this. I know what to do. Stand tall, stand strong, which is something really interesting because that's something I've been having a hard time with lately. So, all right, let's see how the rest of this goes. Okay, yep, I'm starting to get a little freaked out. All right, so we've got a lot ahead of me related to your job or your career. It suggests I focus all of my efforts. Discipline, strategy, and hard work are needed now more than ever. If I become weary or overwhelmed, rely on those around you. And, coming up is going to be a lot of work on a big project at work. And we have a meeting coming up on Tuesday where we're going to have to start planning ahead for a huge event in February that I'm usually stuck doing all by myself. So, yeah, stand tall in my decisions and help to rely on those around me. Don't waver. I'm telling you, sometimes it's freaky. All right, and last but not least, okay, sadness, worry, and illness, which is really funny because I literally am still sick from last week. I sustained an injury, and I am intending to go away at the end of the week. So, financial trouble or rejection, illness, job loss, things, there will be worry. Anxiety is counterproductive and damaging. Rely on meditation. So sounds like, some difficult times might be coming. I've got to bolster myself and, pay attention and be careful. So I might just end up getting sicker again because I know I'm still not over whatever is wrong with me, and I'm having difficulty with the injury a little bit. So basically, the week ahead is reminding me to stand tall and strong, rely on the others around me, and help to know that worrying is not going to fix my problems, and I just need to quiet my mind and meditate, even though some difficult struggles might be coming forth. Okay, so that is my week ahead. The other thing about, doing fortune telling, divination, tarot, things like this, is that it is always going to be your brain taking the information that someone gives you and applying it to the situations that you're concerned about. So even if, I am way off base, we humans, we find patterns in things. So what I'm thinking could have absolutely nothing to do with what, is going to happen this week. None of this could come to pass at all. I could just be completely off base here. But the fact that those 3 cards came up as thinking about, like, I've been having a hard time relying on myself and, like, my intuition at work. I'm thinking constantly, like, oh, you know what? Imposter syndrome is a big problem for me. And of course, like, I don't know what I'm doing ever. So the card reminding me to focus on the part of me that knows what it's doing and just let that take charge. Okay. Then you've got knowing that I need to rely on others and use that, and you're like, use their help to get through this next big project that I almost always end up stuck doing by myself, is going to, help me out. And then focusing on, you know, when bad things happen, which they inevitably always will, don't let the, you know, worry of it all, like, rule your life. Just take it in stride. Okay. These are all messages that everybody needs to hear, and it might mean nothing, but it might mean everything. So, you know, take this as you will, and believe in it or don't believe in it. But there is just a brief overview of tarot and the history of it, at least what I was able to scrape off the internet from, you know, as deep dive as I could get without, you know, getting caught behind paywalls, because why? And yeah, so this is going to be, like I said, probably the beginning of a series. And if you heard any, I'll go back through the types real quick. So again, there was reading of things being bones, runes, dice, salt, tea leaves, cards. Actually, apparently not just like tarot cards, but playing cards could also be used. Crystal balls, things like the I Ching. I'm still not sure how salt works. I'm kind of curious about that one. Or reading people, phrenology, palmistry, physiognomy, and graphology. Or then the reading of signs and symbols like numerology and astrology, or the forces, I should say. So if any of those strike your fancy, or you are particularly interested in hearing about one of them next, drop a comment down below. And in the meantime, stay spooky, because it is that time of year. Stay haunted, and stay curious, you know? Let me know if you try out any divination, or if you are, you know, interested in picking up tarot after this. And I'd love to hear from you. So, bye.